Death Stranding is a third-person open-world action game. It was developed by Kojima Productions and published by 505 Games for PC in July of 2020. In this analysis, we'll be covering the gameplay and story in some detail, so spoiler warnings apply. Death Stranding features a story and characters. I feel confident in saying that there are events that happen, and there are people who cause the events, react to the events, and are affected by the events. It is much less clear what the events are, what meaning we should assign them, and how coherently they hang together. Death Stranding takes place in a post-apocalyptic America. Some event, called Death Stranding, happened in the recent past, which caused society to mostly collapse. The United States government still seems to exist, having been rebranded as the United Cities of America. Most people live in underground bunkers, and many people are isolated and separated. You work for a company called Bridges, which might also be part of the government, or might be the government. It is not really clear. It is also implied that the government is not democratic anymore. By the end of the game, you figure out that Bridget Strand has been president for at least 20 years, and in the early game, they talk about making her daughter, Amelie, the next president. There is no talk about elections through all this. Nor do I have any idea how the government functions. How does it collect taxes? How are its employees paid? What actual services does it provide, besides connection to the chiral network? There is really horrible world building here. I have no idea what happened to all the corporations, and so I have no idea what most people are doing for jobs, how raw materials are mined, how products are being created, etc. I've read through all the emails and interviews in the game, but it just isn't clear. There are hints that the population is living in a kind of post-scarcity world, with many goods capable of being essentially printed. But even if this is the case, the raw materials still need to be gathered somehow. People still need to be educated, unless we are meant to believe that teachers don't exist in this world. They still have doctors. The main character is an Uber Eats delivery guy, or whatever the post-apocalyptic, post-scarcity version of that is. Why is he doing this? He isn't getting paid. He receives likes for doing things, but he can't spend these. When he wants to build something, say a bridge or a new pair of shoes, it only requires certain generic resources, metals, resins, chemicals, or ceramics. The motivation is really unclear. You do increase your connection with whoever you did the job for, and this does increase the chiral bandwidth you have access to, and it also increases the amount of different materials that are available to you at the location. But besides the satisfaction of helping people, which Sam doesn't express at all until later into the game, it doesn't make sense why he delivers stuff. In any case, your job is to deliver stuff. This is made complicated by supernatural beings called BTs, or Beached Things. The Death Stranding event seems to have forged a connection between our world and the world of the dead, and BTs seem to be ghosts, or at least related to the world of the dead. If you get near one, there will be a kind of acid rain called timefall, which rapidly ages most materials it touches. If you get even closer to one, it will detect your presence and attack you. It is not really clear why they are attracted to humans. There is a lot of mystical mumbo-jumbo about matter and antimatter, the ancient Egyptian concept of Ka, spirit, and Ha, body, the idea of chirality, or objects that have mirrored symmetry, and the idea of knots, bonds, connections. Almost all of this is nonsensical in the way that most of the high concepts of Hideo Kojima games are. It seems to be heavily inspired by a short story called Nawa, or The Rope, by a Japanese writer named Kobo Abe, and also by a number of his plays, Suitcase, The Cliff of Time, and The Man Who Turned into a Stick. At the time of writing this, I have only read Nawa, and besides Kojima using the closing quote and getting the images of the black tar ocean from there, I have no idea what the story is meant to convey. Aiding you on your many journeys is BB-28, Bridge Baby 28. This is the infamous baby in the capsule attached to your chest. A BB is a bridge. It connects our world to the beach and can be used to detect the BTs. On your travels, you will also be attacked by mules, which are renegade Uber Eats delivery guys. They are described as having become addicted to delivering things and will do anything to re-experience that high. They will attack other delivery guys and steal their cargo to do so. Some of these go so far as to kill the other delivery guy. In the world of Death Stranding, a dead body will eventually trigger a massive explosion, so you are heavily incentivized not to kill anyone. The only way this can be avoided is if the body is burned or disposed of in a tar pit, which is... who cares? The elements of this game world were as carefully constructed as the magic system in Harry Potter, so if you are older than 12, please don't waste your time trying to understand it, and don't think that being able to poke holes in it makes you a genius either. Just go with it for now. You might be wondering how I'm justifying these claims to shoddy planning and consistency. Let's be clear, this is a Hideo Kojima game. You know, the same guy responsible for the Metal Gear series. In Metal Gear Solid, the main villain is Liquid Snake, and at one point he tricks you into activating the Metal Gear instead of deactivating it. Apparently, this was his plan all along. Wait, what? He sends all of the Foxhound members against you, clearly acts upset when you dispatch them one by one, and we are supposed to believe that he did this to trick you into believing that he wanted to stop your actions so that he could eventually get you to activate the Metal Gear. When there were so many chances that a guard or one of the Foxhounds themselves would kill you before you could activate it. It just doesn't make sense. In Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, you are playing as Raiden, and you need to cross a bridge which has been rigged with C4. Everyone remembers the section I'm talking about, right? You need to carefully shoot the control boxes for each C4 emplacement, because if you shoot the C4 itself, well, game over. As soon as you do this, the boss battle with the Harrier fighter jet starts. This jet starts blasting the bridge with missiles, bullets, and bakes it with the fire from its exhaust. None of this sets off the C4. All through the battle, I'm thinking to myself, why is none of this setting off the C4? Why did I have to shoot so carefully, but now anything goes? Any semblance of logic or adherence to some kind of reality is immediately sacrificed to create the emotional payoff of defeating this boss. but you only get the payoff if you turn off your brain. Why couldn't the boss battle be moved just a little to a slightly different location to avoid this problem? He does this in all of his games. In Death Stranding, the character Fragile has a teleportation ability. She says that she can't transport cargo, but she can teleport herself, her clothes, and another person plus their clothes. At one point in the game, Fragile explains her backstory. She was forced to choose between using her ability to jump away from a city to save herself, or to carry a small nuclear weapon through the magical acid rain, which would permanently age her skin. This, by itself, is stupid. Why only her skin? The opening cutscene of the game establishes that magical acid rain can kill. It shows a bunch of birds falling out of the sky, dead. Clearly, the effects of magical acid rain go deeper than surface level. I've heard some people say that maybe it only has a surface effect because she eats cryptobiotes. However, judging by Higgs' dialogue, it is clear that he expects it to only affect her skin, and I doubt that he would have gone to the lengths of doing experiments on others to confirm that his plan would work, and there is no evidence that he did so. When we interact with Fragile throughout the game, she does not move or hold her body like an aged old woman, so clearly it has only had a surface level effect. The devs have simply changed the way that one of the fundamental environmental hazards in the game works for this one story beat. Further, this nuke is tiny. Why can't she use her jump ability to get rid of the nuke? She can clearly transport inanimate objects, and don't you assholes go telling me that she can only teleport small inanimate objects that she has an emotional connection to. Fuck you. She fucking teleports dead man around all the time. And don't tell me that Fragile has an emotional connection to dead man's underwear, socks, shirt, tie, suit, and shoes. His clothes alone probably have more mass than the nuke. And as far as I can tell, she doesn't need the umbrella to teleport either. It only helps her to do so more accurately, and Higgs breaking it would not have prevented her from teleporting, at least a short distance. Doing a few short jumps should have gotten her far enough away to save her skin and the city. She seems to be able to control what she can teleport as well, as near the end of the game she teleports BB to a beach by imagining him as equipment. Again, BB is about the same size as this nuke. It seems odd that she should only notice this new aspect to her teleport ability at that moment when it wasn't even important for BB to be there, and not when she was put in a truly dire situation and many people's lives were on the line. In short, the powers and mechanics work the way that Kojima and team want them to work, in order to create the story beats and experience they want, even if they need to bend or break the rules that they themselves established from one moment to the next. This is just one example, and I'm going to try to limit it to this. There are mountains of examples of these inconsistencies in Death Stranding in particular, and Kojima's games in general. If I didn't limit myself, this video would be longer than White Light's 7-hour critique. Okay, back to the analysis. Death Stranding features a large cast of stupidly named characters. Almost everyone goes by some kind of online-style call sign instead of a real name. Your boss is called Die Hardman, and his real name turns out to be John McClane. The mortician is called Dead Man. Fragile is a delivery girl from a rival company eponymously named Fragile Express. The scientist with a heart condition who lives near a heart-shaped mountain lake is called Heartman. The female engineer with a baby is called Mama. The prepper who sells junk is the junk dealer. Even the president does not escape this. She is named Bridget Strand. The man who is trying to get BB back is the combat veteran, because he has lots of combat experience, etc. You play Sam Porter Bridges, and you need to deliver stuff. After being called in to meet the dying president, who is also your mother, you are tasked with visiting dozens of locations around the continental US in order to reconnect them and bring them back online to the chiral network. This network allows instantaneous transmission of information. In the game, it is also explained as the way that the player can make use of infrastructure that other players have laid down. Somehow, the infrastructure itself can be transmitted over the network. Reconnecting these sites is branded as making America whole again. To top things off, your sister has already made this trip, but was somehow trapped on the West Coast at Edge Knot City. She will periodically communicate with you over the network and remind you to come and rescue her. While you dispose of the now dead president's body, you get taken by a BT and die. Sam, fortunately, is a repatriate. When he dies, he goes to the ocean, which seems to represent death, then comes back to the land, the world of the living. There seem to be only 2 examples of this in-game, so it is strange that the people of Death Stranding have manufactured a new word, and a clunky one at that everyone seems familiar with for this idea. Again, for now, just go with it. Your first task is to link up the East Coast. To help with your task, you're given BB-28. Along the way, you'll meet Higgs, who thinks he is a god and so takes the name of the god Particle. He becomes one of the main antagonists for most of the game. Following that, you'll need to link up the Central region, which covers the Great Plains, Rocky Mountains, and Southwest. This is by far the largest section of the game, and it is because of the large number of independent preppers living in different parts of the mountainous landscape. At one point in this region, Higgs tries to trick Sam into carrying a nuke to South Knot City. Thankfully, if his over-the-top acting was not enough to tip you off, the package is actually labeled as having belonged to Higgs, and the package description directly says it is a nuke. In case all of that didn't clue you in, the thing glows red while you are carrying it. Here you'll be treated to some more of Fragile's backstory. The final main city to link up in the central region is Mountain Knot City. To do this requires a few trips between it and South Knot City, and this will culminate in you carrying a dying mama to see her twin sister, Lochna, who happens to be both the leader of Mountain Knot City and the software engineer who wrote the code for the Cupid, the device which we've been using to bring these sites onto the chiral network, and which seems to be malfunctioning recently. She agrees to help, and in the meantime, you need to visit a handful of preppers spread across extremely mountainous terrain without the help of BB. Deadman explains that BB is becoming too closely linked with the world of the living. This means he won't be much help anyway, unless Deadman performs a surgery. After a lot of faffing about in the mountains and suffering through more pointless, contradictory explanation, this time from Heartman, you'll connect the last relay station on the edge of a vast tar lake in the southwest. Finally, you'll make it to Edge Knot City, which occupies an area that Bill Hicks would just love. It seems like some cataclysm has wiped California off the map, leaving Edge Knot City where the coast of Hicks's Arizona Bay would be. This is a relatively small area that can be somewhat challenging to navigate, as it is a collapsed city section with decaying chunks of buildings crisscrossing each other and leaning at odd angles. Here, you'll face a giant BT that Higgs summons and enter the final few hours of the game. You'll defeat Higgs on the beach and, after returning, deliver some cryptobiotes to Fragile, who is exhausted after teleporting everyone from the beach back to the regular world. You'll speak with Amelie for the last time, and finally, you'll have to dispose of BB, who has passed away. As you progress through the game, you can increase your connection level with the cities, distribution centers, and preppers by making deliveries for them. This will give you new pieces of equipment, new weapons, more backstory about the various characters, and more mumbo-jumbo rants and theories about the beach, BTs, BBs, the theme, extinction entities, and lots more. At certain points, you'll also encounter the above-mentioned combat veteran, who seems obsessed with BB-28. These encounters are mostly set in 3 different beaches, each of which is themed on a different war that America fought in: World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. There are a number of twists near the end, some of which the perceptive player will already guess or strongly suspect long before they appear. Some of these, well, they follow the same rules as some of Kojima's twists in his earlier games. If you really don't want to know, this is your last warning. Okay, you asked for it. First, although it appears that Higgs and then the combat veteran were controlling Amelie, actually Amelie was controlling them. Further, your sister is actually the spirit of the president and something called an extinction entity. These are implied to be the entities which have triggered the 5 previous mass extinctions on Earth, but this also conflicts with the idea that only humans have beaches, and the previous extinctions occurred before any creatures with a ka, or spirit, existed. The president, in turn, is actually not your mother. Your mother was the comatose wife of the combat veteran. So, the scary guy who forces you to shoot him in World War I, II, and Vietnam is actually your father, and it is you, not the BB you carry, who he has been pursuing. It seems that you were one of the early bridge babies, and when Cliff, your father's real name, discovered the president was planning on doing some experiment on you, he tried to run for it. The president then forced Di Hardman to shoot Cliff, and inadvertently shot you as well. She felt so guilty about this that she went to the beach, found you, and sent you back to the land of the living. In secret, she continued the experiments with BBs, and even used them as the basis for the terminals linking each site to the chiral network. She raised you as her own son. After learning all this during the cutscenes on the way to the incinerator to dispose of BB, you decide to release BB from the capsule, and she wakes up. I promised that I would leave off my nitpicking of the story logic, but I really have to bring up 2 points. Amelie and President Bridget Strand are the same person. Amelie is the spirit, while Bridget is the body. Since Amelie is spirit and essentially confined to the beach, she does not age. She always looks like President Bridget did when she was 20. Yet nobody notices this over the course of at least 40 years. Nobody saw Amelie as a baby or teenager. She just started out having the appearance of being 20 and stayed that way. So everyone just buys that Bridget had a daughter when she was 20, yet nobody ever met her over the course of 20 years, and here comes her daughter when the president is 40-ish, who can only be interacted with over the chiral network, and who happens to look exactly the same as her mother did when she was 20. To hide the similarity in appearance, the president takes to wearing a skull face mask. Eventually, Amelie is put in charge of the first expedition heading west to reconnect the nation. Yet she never went to school, has no health records, no university friends, no former co-workers or work history, and everyone seems fine with this and they only question it at the end of the game. Is this supposed to be a commentary on nepotistic governments, or is it just lazy writing? I know that a lot of people died during the event of the Death Stranding, and much data was lost, but still, this is just ridiculous. Amelie does not have a physical body. She is a spirit. Why not just have her change her appearance instead of the president wearing the mask in real life? She clearly can, as she appears differently to different people several times. This is so stupid. We're really supposed to believe that the President of the United Cities of America randomly decided to start wearing a skull face mask, and this didn't make anyone question her sanity or her fitness to lead the nation? This is the same kind of logic that has Solidus Snake being president, but has Solid Snake never recognize him in Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2. Does he just not watch the news, nor consume any kind of visual media at all? And the twist regarding Sam actually being Cliff's son. In the flashback cutscenes, and when Cliff confronts us, he always says BB, which, to repeat, is Bridge Baby. Who refers to their child that way? I mean, parents have nicknames for their children, but who always uses the nickname instead of the actual name of their child? And Bridge Baby is not a nickname. It is a title or a common name. It just says the function or key attribute of the object. It is something like a mother or father calling their baby Down syndrome or cleft lip or sickle cell anemia instead of Rebecca, Tom, or Sally. No parent does this, and it is annoying that the game expects us to believe that Cliff used Sam's name so rarely that the only memory of it is seen at the end. There is a lot more to be said about these twists and how they are handled, but I'll close my nitpicking with 2 points. Kojima himself has responded indirectly to such criticisms in his games. For example, this comment by Paramedic in Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. And his fans have dutifully repeated it themselves. In SkillUp's review of the game, he says,
just focusing on little tiny details like that, it just seems like such a fucking waste of time when you've got something this good.
Kojima has also said that he wants his games to convey some meaning to his players. He doesn't care if they come off as preachy, because he thinks learning something about the world is important. If there is nothing to learn, it's boring. He is a father, and he tries to teach his children about life in various ways, and he views his games as another way of giving his viewpoints and messages to the world. Well, I'm sorry, but you don't get to have it both ways. If you want people to take your message seriously, you don't get to surround your message with a lot of bullshit. If I discovered something really important about life and typed out a deliberately confusing, poorly organized, misspelled, and grammatically incorrect screed, and deliberately spilled coffee and donut grease on the paper, people have every right to discard what I'm saying and treat me like a nut job. There are about 80 staff working at Kojima Productions, and I'm sure it took hundreds of thousands of hours to make Death Stranding. Between January 2016 and January 2020, you have about 1,000 working days. 1,000 days at 8 hours a day times 80 staff is 640,000 man-hours, and I'm 100% sure that this is a horrible underestimate. Working conditions at Japanese game companies are known to be grueling, and I don't imagine that Kojima Productions is any different. To make a game like Death Stranding requires a ton of work, and it requires a lot of thought, design, and planning to make something even remotely coherent. But Death Stranding seems deliberately nonsensical and contradictory at times. To repeat, you simply cannot tell people, hey, it's just a game, just turn your brain off and enjoy. Lighten the fuck up. Why so serious? And at the same time tell them, stop and think carefully about the symbolism and deeper meaning inherent in the systems and story here. But anyway, moving on. After sitting through several hours of exposition dumps at the end, and going through the unskippable credit sequence twice, you are set free to complete more deliveries with BB due to a convenient time warp setting you back in time. As Sam, you'll spend the majority of your time walking, running, and climbing the large open areas. You can't swim, but if you get in over your head, you'll be able to paddle back to one of the shores. Your movement is heavily influenced by the cargo you are carrying. Placing heavy objects high up on your back will throw your center of mass way off, making it easier to lose your balance. Turning quickly also threatens to do so, and running or moving over rough terrain can also trip you up. Besides possibly damaging Sam, you can also damage your cargo, reducing the number of likes you get upon delivery. The game spends a lot of time teaching you how to use the left and right mouse buttons or the left and right triggers to rebalance the weight on your back. You can also grip both simultaneously to reduce your speed but maintain your balance more strictly. Moving around causes chip damage to your boots, reduces your stamina meter, and makes Sam more tired. These all can make it more likely to trip and fall. The same goes for any vehicles you are riding in. Their batteries will drain, and drain dynamically based on the weight they are carrying, the terrain you are covering, and the slope of the terrain. You can restore some of your stamina by sitting and resting, drinking some Bridges energy drink, and by receiving likes for various actions. BB will help you detect BTs as you move around, and your Odra deck, the predator-like shoulder device will also let you analyze the terrain around you and highlight different structures, packages, and enemies. If you fall or encounter a BT, BB-28 will become stressed, and you must either take the time to comfort him or risk him becoming temporarily unavailable until you can rest in a safe house or private room. Combined with the movement systems above, this is the meat of Death Stranding. You'll spend a lot of time managing your cargo and inventory. You have a weight limit for what you can carry on your back, but your suit also has spots on your upper arms and legs to which you can attach smaller items. As you progress through the game, you'll unlock buddy bots, which can make certain deliveries for you, floating carriers that can trail behind you to haul more cargo, companion bots that do the same, zip lines, cargo catapults, and a number of different vehicles which can greatly expand your ability to move stuff. The vehicles have similar limits to their capacity. Each inventory item has 2 health bars. If it is equipped, it has a regular health bar, and if it is being carried, it also has a container health bar. If you drop an item, throw it, or spend time in the acid rain, first the container, then the item will take damage. A great deal has been made of the multiplayer elements of Death Stranding. As you explore the environments, you'll encounter cliffs, chasms, and rough, almost unpassable terrain. If you come to a chasm, you could build a bridge using one of your portable 3D printers. This bridge will be visible to other players connected to the network, and vice versa. Another player might leave a ladder at a cliff base, or a rope anchor at the top of the cliff, and you can like these and make use of them. Players can also build safe houses, road sections, zip lines, and many, many other elements. Because of the resources required, it is often necessary for multiple players to contribute over an extended period of time. Further, because of the acid rain, these elements can degrade rapidly over time if not maintained. While interesting and thematically important, I think it is important to acknowledge precedents to these kinds of systems. Most players will immediately jump to Dark Souls and the ability to summon other players, but Dragon's Dogma has systems that are more similar, although still not as in-depth. In Dragon's Dogma, you can make use of NPCs called pawns, which other players have designed, equipped, and leveled up. Using these pawns can enhance your party's balance of abilities, and due to the quests completed, areas explored, and enemies encountered in their base world, they can give you advice or hints about how to handle your current situation. When you send them back to their own player, you can give them a gift and rate them in different ways. Metal Gear Solid V, The Phantom Pain, features a competitive version of this kind of gameplay, with the ability to raid other players' forward operating bases for materials and staff, and Nier Automata allows players to assist others during one of the final ending sequences, at the cost of their own game save data. The unique part of Death Stranding is how integral these are to gameplay and the story, and how broad the effects are. Earlier sections of the game, which were challenging to cross at first, become almost trivial after building roads, bridges, and zip lines together with other players. After facing a difficult traversal, finding a player-built safe house generates such a feeling of relief and gratitude that it is difficult to describe. I often found myself just placing and leaving ladders and rope anchors, confident that other players would find them useful as well, and desiring to pay it forward, so to speak, for the help I'd gotten along the way. Structures that you build do have several direct costs to the player, however. First is the material needed to build them. Second, all these structures utilize a certain amount of chiral bandwidth, which can be raised by increasing your connection level with the area's hub. It is possible, however, to build so many structures that you max out your bandwidth and cannot build anymore. During BT encounters, these elements also appear. If you shout out, white versions of Sam, representing other players, will come out of the black tar and throw you blood bags, grenades, and guns. One last point to mention here is that there is no way to dislike one of these online elements, nor can you pirate resources from a road section, safe house, or bridge that is under construction. The inability to do these things means the player can only abstain from action or contribute. You can dismantle structures that other players have created, but doing so will remove them from your world only, and has no effect on the amount of chiral bandwidth being used in the area. Although these online elements create a sense of community and positivity, it is 100% enforced and artificial. Combat exists in Death Stranding, but it will probably make you wish that it didn't. Combat is similar in some ways to combat in the Metal Gear Solid series. In most MGS games, you will try to sneak and avoid direct confrontation as much as possible, but Kojima and company felt that they should force you into combat occasionally. Death Stranding is much the same. You will be wandering along, focused on navigating the terrain and keeping your balance, and suddenly you'll be thrust into combat. You have a large number of both lethal and non-lethal weapons, although as I said above, being non-lethal is highly prioritized. These options include handguns, assault rifles, shotguns, rocket and grenade launchers, a bola gun for binding enemies, a rope that can be used to non-lethally garrote humans, stun grenades, and a variety of bodily fluid-based weapons, blood and fecal matter grenades, and even bullets using such fluids. To reiterate, there are two main types of enemies: human mules and supernatural BTs. The humans are your standard shooter fare, and they will appear with differing amounts of armor throughout the game. Some will be armed with electric spears, while others will have sticky guns with which to steal cargo off you. Still others will use lethal or non-lethal handguns, shotguns, or assault rifles. There are a few different types of BTs you'll randomly encounter. Some human-like, semi-invisible floating ones, a large squid-like one, a large squid-lion one, and a large whale-like one. There are a few variations of each, and a few unique boss ones as well. But they all have only a few different attacks, and all, with one exception, react strongly to Sam's bodily fluids, and will need to be fought using weapons and ammunition imbued with them. The BTs function somewhat as open-world boss encounters, but they can also be treated as enforced stealth sections. You can crouch down to move more slowly, hold your breath to decrease the chances of detecting you, or even just sprint toward the border of the acid rain region. If you're spotted, tar tendrils will sprout and try to latch onto you. If caught, a bunch of small human-like BTs will try to drag you into the tar. You can shake these off, piss on them, or throw other bodily fluids at them to cool their ardor. The same will happen if you are driving a car. The BTs will try to pull you out, which you can try to shake off. Failing all of that will trigger the appearance of one of the larger BTs. If you are grabbed by one of the floating human BTs, this will instead kill Sam and force you to repatriate. The standard third-person shooter aiming mechanics have been implemented, but the reticle's shape leaves much to be desired, and when firing near any potentially obstructing object, it will move to that object's surface, signaling that you will hit that instead of the enemy target. While helpful, you will still probably waste a lot of rounds hitting nearby walls, boxes, or barrels. You can also switch the over-the-shoulder camera, but there is no FPS mode. The camera itself feels somehow off all the time, positioning itself a bit awkwardly, and there is no good way to shoot at nearby enemies. Because of how the balancing and cargo mechanics work, using the left and right triggers and face buttons, you will find these conflicting with combat. When you equip a weapon, you will aim it by holding down the left trigger, using the right analog stick to move the view around, and fire using the right trigger. If you are moving around and trying to fire or aim, you will often find that the left trigger will result in shifting the weight on your back instead of aiming, or using the right trigger will result in shifting your cargo load to the right instead of firing. Similarly, the X button on an Xbox controller is mapped to the punch action, the connect floating carrier action, the reload action, the enter vehicle action, the interact with terminal action, and a few others. In tense combat encounters, you can easily find yourself grabbing a ladder instead of punching, or punching instead of entering a vehicle. If you take down an enemy near you, releasing the left trigger to exit aiming mode so you can turn more quickly, then pressing it again will cause you to pick up whatever cargo the enemy dropped with your left hand, instead of entering aiming mode. Overall, the shooting feels competent but clunky, and every time I received a new blueprint for a weapon, or saw that my route would force me through a mule camp or a BT area, I groaned inside. In many ways, it feels like one of the older MGS games, Metal Gear Solid or Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, for example. When moving against an obstacle, Raiden would enter a stealth mode, but this made it really difficult to approach a box and climb on top of it. The controls, their context sensitivity, and overlapping contexts seem to be constantly getting in the way of enjoying the game. This is the exact opposite of MGS-V, the Phantom Pain. Venom Snake controls like a dream in combat encounters. Depending on the type of ammunition the enemies are using, you might take consciousness damage or blood damage. You can replenish your blood by eating cryptobiotes, getting a transfusion from a blood bag in your inventory, or by resting. If your blood goes to 0, you will die and have to repatriate elsewhere. If your consciousness goes to 0, nearby mules will steal all your cargo and carry your unconscious body outside their zone of control. The beginning of the game focuses on the traversal system, but enemies, both BTs and mules, grow more frequent as the game progresses. These are never very challenging to deal with, even though I managed to die several times on many BT encounters. And besides some bosses, both paranormal and human enemies can almost always be run away from. Almost all the gameplay is encapsulated in making a delivery. You will need to pick your loadout of equipment, load up the cargo, and carry it intact from A to B as quickly and safely as you can. If you plan your routes carefully, you will be able to make multiple deliveries both along the way to the final destination and back to your starting point. Navigating the challenges of the map is fun and exciting, and forces you to think about your route, your cargo, and the likely conditions you will face. If you want to complete a delivery that is delicate and has a strict time limit, you might want to traverse your route beforehand, clearing the way of any mules or BTs and laying down some infrastructure to assist your future self. For example, placing a zip line to connect with another players, allowing you to get over those 300 meters much faster and with no risk of damage to your cargo. Or maybe setting out with a truck loaded with materials in order to repair or finish building the roads in the area. If the acid rain or snow is persistent, you might want to build a shelter or two. When you decide the time is ripe to make the delivery, you'll want to load up on any provisions and equipment you'll need for the trek itself. Pick your favorite pair of boots and pack a spare set. Make sure your exoskeleton matches what you need and print any gloves or container repair spray you need. If you'll be going on foot, maybe a ladder and a rope anchor just in case. If you didn't take care of the mules and BTs beforehand, you may want to carry some weapons to do so now. Print any floating carriers and buddy bots you want, or print the vehicle, if any, you want to use. Finally, load up with the cargo you need to transport. Now, I should say here that I'm an avid hiker and rock climber. I've climbed several easy mountainous routes in Switzerland, Norway, France, and Spain, and in Japan I've climbed a good selection of mountains, both on and off the list of the Hyakume-san, or 100 famous mountains. For rock climbing, I've plateaued at the 5.10D or 5.11A level. I love the way that being aware of the terrain at all times is a concern in Death Stranding. See a rock coming up that might trip you up? Just take a little detour to the left or right. Managing your momentum and stamina on slopes feels just like it does on mountains, and taking a small break to regain your stamina and relax the tension of being aware of what you're doing and how your cargo is moving is a great homage to hiking as well. Although this process is rewarding in and of itself, when you finally complete your delivery, you are forced to interact with the rewards screens. These are such a pain in the ass that I wonder how the game was released in this state, and remains that way 4 years later. It almost seems like Kojima hired a bunch of animators and UI people, and needed to give them busy work during production, which made it into the final game. Okay, let's break it down. When you deliver a package, you'll get a cutscene where the recipient checks it over and gives you some inane comments. Then you'll be taken to the evaluation screen. I counted the number of inputs required to complete these menus for 3 small deliveries at 75. 75. Each item that is delivered has animated data showing the damage amount, the distance and path you carried it along, and the delivery as a whole gets evaluated in 5 categories, each of which gets updated with animated text and graphics. If you have increased your connection level, there will be an animated panel showing the benefits you gained, what items unlocked, what material storage limits were increased, etc. After all this, the recipient will make a few more comments and you'll be kicked out of the menu. But wait! If you have just maxed out your connection level with this delivery, there are another 2 animated panels, a few more comments, and a few cutscenes for Sam picking up a literal gold star and putting it on his suit. If you want to skip everything, there is a skip all button, but this needs to be activated each time you make a delivery. Even with skip all active, you will still be forced to give input to progress to the next screen, cutscene, or comment, but instead of 75, it will be reduced to around 10. A significant reduction factor, but still far too high. If you let these play for each delivery, you can easily balloon your playtime without increasing your enjoyment or actual gameplay time by a significant margin. While we are talking about using the terminals, a lot of actions trigger these overly animated panels. Recycling materials, for example, or recovering lost data. As a final point about these menus, many times you will be kicked out of the main terminal menu instead of returned to it, even though you have other items on your agenda. For example, having made your delivery, you might want to share the recovered memory stick that you picked up along the way as well. Completing either action will take you out of the menu and back to the regular game screen. This forces you to hold the X button for a second to re-enter the terminal menu. Now that you've completed a delivery, you might be tired. If you want to rest in a private room, there are skippable animated sequences showing Sam ride the elevator up and down to the private room, ones showing him collapsing on the bed, and in the private room itself, oh boy. You cannot move around these rooms freely. You are forced to sit on the bed and rotate the camera around to look at different objects and press a button to interact with them. All these interactions trigger skippable animations of Sam getting up and the camera zooming into the object, and once the interaction is finished, there are skippable ones for the camera zooming out and panning and showing Sam sitting back down. Skipping these actually takes longer than just letting the game finish the animation, as when you skip it, it takes the game more time to load the end state of the animation than just playing the animation to the end. Why were these included? Why can't you just walk around the room freely? It seems like some kind of homage to the aerial command center in Metal Gear Solid V, The Phantom Pain. But that aside, the design choice makes zero sense. Again, it almost seems like Kojima had booked X hours of motion capture time with Norman Reedus, and in order to utilize these, decided to restrict player movement in this bizarre fashion and use these custom animations instead. In many ways, it seems similar to how Red Dead Redemption 2 designed its menus and loot animations, without regard for the negative impact it has on the player experience. I'm actually going to shout out their names here. Lead UI artist, Sumoto Hashiguchi, UI artists, Casey Tsuyoshi Matsumoto, Hirotaka Kinoshita,
Ryotaro Nakano,
lead UI programmer Makoto Abe, UI programmers Yusuke Takano, Yuki Sato, Motonori Ninomiya, Yuma Imura, and Koichi Ueyama. Hideo Kojima is not credited here, but let's face it, it is his studio, so he bears ultimate responsibility. Thank you all for wasting so much of your players' time with your idiotic UI design. As you make deliveries, you will be evaluated in 5 categories: bridge link, cargo condition, miscellaneous, delivery time, delivery volume. Increasing your score in one of these categories will improve Sam's stats in different ways and contributes to your Porter grade. As these are part of the hated reward screen, I'm not going to cover them in more detail. There are limits to the number of bots you may have delivering cargo for you, although you can increase these by leveling up. You can only have 2 floating carriers follow you at a time. Further, these have terrain and vehicle restrictions. You cannot use ropes to ascend or descend slopes, nor can you use ladders in a vertical position, nor navigate vertical slopes higher than the length of the strand connecting you to the carriers. These actions will cause the strand to snap. You also cannot use a vehicle or zipline when you have carriers or bots following you. I've already mentioned the cargo limits for Sam and for the vehicles, but these two also interact. If your truck is full and you have above a certain height of cargo stacked on your back, you will be unable to ride in the truck, as your backpack will not fit on the front seat. Your options for interacting with things are also limited in different ways. For example, Sam always drinks from his flask using his left hand, so if you are carrying an item in that hand, you will not be able to drink. Since you need the right hand's cufflinks to ride a zipline, if Sam is carrying something in that hand, you won't be able to make use of it. Lastly, you need both hands to drive any vehicle, so carrying an item in either hand will block this interaction. This is technically only true if you don't have any space inside the vehicle, nor any space on your back or suit for the item to go. There is only one ending to the game. You stop Bridget/Amelie from executing the last stranding right now, and she shuts herself away on her beach, cutting her beach off from all others. John McClane becomes the next president, and Sam releases BB from the capsule, and the two go off together. After this ending, you can go back and continue building infrastructure, increasing your connections with other porters through online play, and to NPCs by delivering more packages. As usual, this section will cover the dynamic elements using the framework developed by Joris Doormans. Dynamic friction. Because this pattern appears in its positive form of reducing the friction dynamically, instead of the much more common negative form of increasing friction, I am tempted to rename this dynamic lubrication. This pattern appears in how your travel times are affected by infrastructure. The more infrastructure you invest in for each route, the more quickly and smoothly you can traverse the distance. The way that your batteries drain and your vehicle lifespan is also affected by this. Since your batteries for the vehicles and your exoskeleton do not drain when you are crossing bridges or traveling on roads, the useful lifespan of these items is greatly increased. Since it is much smoother to travel using this infrastructure, your vehicles also take less damage from interacting roughly with the rocks and terrain. This increases the number of places you can make deliveries to before taking a rest. The dynamic engine pattern appears in the building of infrastructure. By placing infrastructure in the world, you can make the route between two delivery points significantly easier. This allows you to make more deliveries there and to use both points as launch sites for deliveries to other spots. Making more deliveries increases your connection level with that center and thus increases the amount of materials you can store and requisition from there. This increases your ability to further improve the infrastructure, etc. Playstyle reinforcement. By doing more missions, you also unlock more gear. While Death Stranding does not offer anything like the flexibility that Metal Gear Solid V did in terms of loadout, playstyle, and strategy, unlocking more gear and more types of gear does increase your options and allows you to play more in your preferred style. Escalating challenge. Over the course of Death Stranding, the difficulty of the traversal will gradually increase, as will the number of enemies, their armor, and their ability to deal damage. Trade. You can recycle used or unneeded items to reclaim some of their materials, but there is no buying or selling mechanic. There is a plethora of places you can find the stopping mechanism. In the limits on chiral bandwidth, forcing you to choose your pieces of infrastructure. The limits on cargo carrying for Sam and the vehicles. The limits to the number of floating carriers and buddy bots and companion bots. The fact that you must wait a few seconds for your Odra deck to recharge before you can scan again is another example of the stopping mechanism. Static friction. The static friction pattern occurs through the decay of placed infrastructure. Also, the reduction in Sam's stamina and the damage to boots and equipment through wear and tear are examples of the static friction pattern. Worker placement. The worker placement pattern appears in the use of buddy bots and in the placement of different structures. If you assign a buddy bot to do one delivery, you obviously cannot assign the same bot to do another delivery simultaneously. The placement of these bots to particular jobs determines the benefits you get. Similarly, because chiral bandwidth is limited, you can only have so many structures in place in a region before you need to start making careful choices about which ones are most beneficial to you. Death Stranding is the first game made by Kojima Productions as an essentially independent entity. If Hideo Kojima wanted something in the game, there was basically no one to tell him, "Hey, I'm not sure about that. No, that's a horrible idea." Or, "That's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard." There are countless interesting choices and design points, which I hope I have highlighted in this analysis. However, many times it feels like the game is as much helped by Hideo Kojima's personality and design philosophy as it is hindered by the same. The idiotic character naming, overly convoluted and self-contradictory story, and the poor delivery of exposition severely damage the player's ability to suspend their disbelief and take the story and the message the gameplay is intended to convey seriously. I don't know that Death Stranding needed third-person shooting at all, and the supernatural elements, while visually striking, are explained in pretentious ways, and both interrupt the fun hiking elements. Kojima's games are often cited as examples of magical realism. For example, the way that the Metal Gear series blends realistic military action with psychic powers, vampires, etc. I don't think this is accurate, though. Almost all the supernatural elements receive a grounded explanation, however nonsensical that explanation might be in conjunction with the rest of the story elements. I can only conclude that Kojima is trying to do magical realism, but is doing it wrong. By trying to explain everything, he does more damage than if he just didn't explain it. Much like how George Lucas damaged Star Wars by explaining the Force using midichlorians in Episode 1. My verdict is this. Death Stranding is currently the most Kojima game out there, in all the best and the worst ways. If you want to buy it and experience it yourself, be aware of what you are buying. A flawed diamond with a light coating of shit. In many places, the diamond is revealed, and oh how it sparkles and dazzles. In others, all you can see are the cracks, and all you can smell is the shit. Like the stories and plays by Kobo Abe, which inspired it, Death Stranding can be confused and confusing, and it can also create powerful images that latch onto you in ways you don't quite understand or expect.